Now, have you noticed that the Bible is not overly sentimental about anything except God's love for us? I mean, even when you look at the Bible and marriage and family, you'd have to say not a lot of sentimental stuff there, not a lot of emotional stuff, kind of cynical, really, in some ways. And here's the reason, because people, because of sin, have learned you can't trust hardly anything perfectly. We see it in culture. Trust is hard to come by. And there's a lot of people who don't trust marriage. They run from it, or because of their lack of trust, they fail in it. And there are Christians who think, well, now, on the other hand, marriage and family, like that's the golden bullet for happiness. That's the golden ticket. And so they see it in a different way. But really, the Bible shows us something more real. We see in marriage and in family, with all of its joys, there are also difficulties. And it's really a journey. And what the journey does is it points us to Jesus, and it says, this is what you need to have a fulfilled life. And then he shows us that when we put our trust in him, that our marriages and our families get better. And you really see that in all these fascinating stories in the Old Testament. Today's story is going to show you that too. It's in Genesis 29. And if you've been on this Genesis journey with us, you know that we've been following the lives of these three great men of the past. You know, these three great family men, so to speak. Abraham, of course, being the big guy, and then his son Isaac, and now his son Jacob, his grandson Jacob. And what we're going to see is this journey takes a lot of twists and turns. And what happened, if you remember, we talked about this last week, Isaac sent Jacob off to find himself a wife in Padam Aram. And so let me tell you the story. I'm going to do it with cliff notes because it's very long, and you can read it later. I hope you will. After Jacob had the blessing of being the promised one to carry the lineage forward, Dad and Mom sent him off to get a wife. And so he made a 100-mile walk to a place that his uncle Laban lived. Laban was a shepherd, as was his clan. That's how they made a living. So he got close. He found a well, and there were some locals there. So he started talking to them about things, and turns out that they knew his uncle, and they were from Haran, the place that his uncle was from. So after some pleasantries, he asked them why they hadn't been watering the sheep, and they said, well, a couple of reasons. Number one, there's a huge lid on that. We can't get it off. So they must have been young guys. And then number two, they said, we're still waiting for people to come. And it was at that point that Laban's daughter Rachel shows up with her sheep. And what you get the feeling of is it was love/lust at first sight. So let's read from verse 10. It says, when Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle Laban, and Laban's sheep, so apparently they went together, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel, not the sheep, but Rachel, and began to weep out loud. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah, which would be her aunt. Now, Laban had two daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel, this girl. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. So this is pretty good news for the family, by the way, that their nephews come back. And so Rachel goes to tell Laban the news, and of course he runs out to meet him and gives him a big old country welcome. And so they spent about a month catching up, and in the meantime, Jacob made himself useful and helps out around the place. Apparently Laban saw he was a hard-working dude and had some value. So we're going to see this about Laban later, by the way. He's a shrewd fellow. So he offers to pay him to work for him. He said, it's not really fair for you to work for me if I'm not paying you. So in the meantime, what's Jacob been doing all month? He's been hanging out with Rachel. That's what he's been doing, as close as he can get, because he's got eyes on Rachel. Here's the statement. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, I'll work for you for 7 years, this is to Laban, in return for your younger daughter, Rachel. And yes, that's the way they did things back then, friends. You can do all the social commentary you want, but that's the way they did things. So Laban had him where he wanted him. He saw this opportunity. And then you read maybe the sappiest verse in the whole Bible. So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel. But they seem like only a few days because of his lust for her. It says love, but that's not it. You kind of get the impression that he's counting down the days, because I think he gets to the day, and he says, "Give me my wife," to Laban. "My time is completed." And you catch this statement, "and I want to make love to her." Boom, I got to tell you, the NIV censored that. I'm not kidding. In the original Hebrew, it was much more construction worker feel to it. I'm not kidding. So they did what was customary. They had this big old ceremony. They had this feast, and it would be appropriate for the bride to come covered from head to toe, including a veil over her face. And so the marriage occurred. Only when Jacob woke up the next morning, he didn't look into the gorgeous face of Rachel. Verse 25, when morning came, there was Leah. Surprise. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you've done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" And then Laban says, in essence, "Well, I don't know how you do things back there in Bethel, but here in my country, the older daughter gets married first, and then the younger. But no worries, I'm going to make you a twofer. So you hang out with this daughter Leah for 7 days, and then I'll give you Rachel as a kind of a bonus. All you got to do is work for me for another 7 years." So Jacob's so love-struck, he makes the deal. The week's up. Laban gives Rachel to him. He doesn't waste any time, if you know what I mean. Here's the summary statement in verse 29. His love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah. Well, isn't this setting up well? Can you imagine the dramatic tent activity in that thing? So he worked for Laban for another 7 years. That's 14 years of hard labor for 2 wives. I don't know, maybe, I don't know. So where does God go in this fiasco? Because, we've learned that in their day, in their culture, having children is really that's like getting a new franchise if you're a business owner. Like every child, it's a new franchise. It's a big deal. And so Leah she becomes the baby mama. That's what God does. It says, when the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive, but Rachel remained childless. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, and that means he saw me. Hold on to that for a few minutes. For she said, it's because the Lord has seen my misery, but I think it's also because she's hoping now Jacob will see her, notice her. Surely my husband will love me now. Hear that? And then she conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, because the Lord has heard that I'm not loved, because it hasn't happened yet, he gave me another one, and his name is Simeon. He listened, because surely my husband will hear my voice now, though he's been ignoring me for all these years. And then again she conceived, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, now at last my husband will become attached to me because I've borne him 3 sons. He's surely going to love me now. His name was Levi. So you see that she's banking on the fact that with every child she has, every male child, that somehow that's going to endure him to her. So what happens? Verse 35, because it hasn't happened yet. She conceived again, and she gave birth to a son. She said, listen to this. This time, I will praise the Lord. And she named him Judah. And then she stopped having children. In other words, she stopped putting her ability to have children into the situation where she's trying to gain her husband's approval. Now I want to show you some things that come from this, because I really think they come back to our cultural expectations toward finding one true love. Let me talk to you about that for a minute through the context of this. First of all, there is an overpowering human drive to find that one true love. Second, there is devastation and disillusionment that almost always comes with that journey. And then third, we can do something with this longing that's more healthy, that's better for us and others. So let me go back through those. There is this human drive to find one true love, the belief that if I find that person, I'm going to be validated. I'm going to be okay. Jacob believed this when he saw Rachel. That's the one. He saw her. She was lovely in form and beautiful, and that's exactly what it means. That's what it means in the Hebrew. She was a knockout. Now, there's all kinds of signals about his over-the-top infatuation with her physical nature, okay? Because it says that sappy verse, remember? His love of her is so great that, that it seemed to be but a few days when that 7 years passed by so he could have her. Now, the next verse is more insightful as to his motivation. Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife. I want to make love to her." Now, that's pretty blunt for a son-in-law to say to his father-in-law. Pretty over the top, really inappropriate. As a matter of fact, Jewish scholars for centuries have been trying to write that one off. But there's no getting around it. And here's what I think. I think that Jacob's life had become pretty empty. I mean, give this some consideration with me. He really didn't think he had his father's love because his father loved his brother Esau. Remember that? He was more inclined to Esau. And, he really didn't have a lot of respect for God because remember what happened when he was in the desert and there was this vision and then he started bargaining with God like, I don't know if I can trust you, God. And maybe that's because he couldn't trust his father, he thought, so he couldn't trust his father's God. I don't know. But then he lost everything. He had no family, no inheritance, nothing. And then he sees this knockout beauty, because he was sent off to get a wife. And so he's like, wow, now I can become somebody. Finally, I can validate my lousy life if I get this girl. And we know that never happens in our culture today, but it did happen then. That she's going to fix me. Now, there's another person here that had that same kind of thing. It's Leah. I mean, because think about this. She went along with this whole thing where she got veiled up, went to bed with this man as her husband. He didn't know think about all that. She had lived under the shadow of her hot sister, and she's described as having weak eyes. I have no idea what that means. It could mean that she was, she couldn't see very well or not at all. I don't know. It could mean that she was cross-eyed, which would be kind of weird to look at, I suppose, if she was a beauty, but she was cross-eyed. And maybe she had a unibrow. I don't know what the issue was. What it indicates is she was particularly unattractive compared to her sister. She might have been beautiful and physically, we don't know, but compared to Rachel, no. So you can see why she went along with her father's little scheme to get married to Jacob, and it's kind of a desperate attempt, really, by both of them. She might have thought, well, once we're married, Jacob's going to change. He'll see me for what I am, and then it'll validate me. And we know that never happens in our day, where people get married thinking, once I marry them, they'll change toward me. It's a common belief. When I find my true love, I will be validated. Because our life does have a vacuum that only love can meet. That's true. And I think the men and women both look for significance and value by being loved by another person. I think that's, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with romance. It seems like God has a romantic bent toward him. If you see how he talks about us as his bride, he's our bridegroom. And so there's this, God invented this. And when you and I are fortunate enough to find someone who fills some of that void in our life, what a blessing. Jackie and I celebrated our 39th anniversary yesterday. And I know you're wondering, what'd she do, marry a third grader? I understand. That's hard to understand, but yeah, she did. But anyway, intellectually, third grader, yes, that's me. But what a beautiful thing for us. But you know what? I believe this. Jackie didn't marry me as a substitute for God, nor did I for her. Here's the problem. A love partner can become the divine ideal where I think I'm going to fulfill my life, where I can find redemption in a world where the world tells me I'm not valuable. And the problem becomes when I elevate another person to the position of God in my life. That is exactly what Jacob did. And it's exactly what Leah did. And it is what our culture tells us to do. To load all of our deepest needs and love needs on the hearts and the back of another person. And what do we always discover in the end about that? They are not God. And only God can fill the deepest needs. And you know to this where we live, everyone tries to look so cool and pulled together and have a lot of stuff that attracts them to others. And they spend lots of time and money on their appearance, showing that really they have some desperation. And we've been brainwashed believing that we can't survive without some apocalyptic romance and love in our life. And if we haven't experienced that in our life, we're a loser. The human longing for love is real. It's just that no human being can fill it, not like God can. Because here's the thing, number 2, there will be disillusion and discouragement if my pursuit is to find one true love in a human being. It was devastation for Jacob. I mean, think about, he got the girls, what a fiasco. I mean, he wakes up and it says when morning came, there was Leah. That's kind of a slam, He looked and discovered he'd married the wrong girl. Think about this for a minute. It must have occurred to Jacob that Laban had done to him what he did to his father. Do you remember what happened? When he stole the blessing, remember that? He disguised himself. His father couldn't see, so he went in and he fooled him by trying to sound like his brother Esau and trying to fool him with this meal that he'd prepared. And remember how he had a banquet, so to speak, and then remember how he had fur on his arms to make him feel hairy like his brother, so when his dad touched him, it is my son. Remember that? The fooling he did. And do you think that maybe the conversation might have went like this the next morning when he looked and he saw Leah? He said, I cried out, Rachel, in the dark, and you answered. And maybe she said, yeah, just like you did with your father. And suddenly the evil that he has done comes back to him. And he sees what it's like to be manipulated and deceived, and he meekly picks up and works for another 7 years to get Rachel. And then there's Leah. I mean, think about this. She's having babies, hoping that she can finally be validated in his eyes. It says, really some of the saddest passages in the scriptures where it just shows how desperate people become to be loved. Leah gave birth to her first child, and she named him Reuben because it means, now he'll see me. Now my husband will notice me. Now I won't be invisible to him anymore. Then this second son, she names him Simeon, which has to do with hearing. Now maybe my husband will finally hear what I have to say. But he didn't. And then there's this third son, and she names him Levi, which means now he'll be attached to me. Now he'll want to love me because I deserve it. And what is she doing? She has set her heart and her hopes and her dreams on finding validity in the arms of a man who can't give it and won't give it. And if I have babies and if I have sons, this man will love me. Finally, my life will be fixed. And instead, what's she doing? She's going down to hell. That's what she's doing. Because she's not going to get it from him. I mean, every day of her life, she is condemned to this hell. Here's this man she longs for, and there's my sister who has all of his attention. And I got to live in that. And in the meantime, I'm raising his children. And that is devastation, friend. Devastation. C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity says, most people, if they really learn to look into their own hearts, would know that they want acutely something that cannot be had in this world. There are all sorts of things in this world that the world offers to give to you, but they never quite keep their promise. So he put all this weight on this person he was marrying, and then he goes through the devastation of all the they got fooled by his father-in-law, and he has to live in all that. And then she's the same way. She's part of this devastation too. And all their hopes and dreams go into that. Now, you can do some things with this, by the way, this disappointment and disillusions, because you might be discovering this too. Maybe you think, well, I've tried to validate myself with a person and it's not working out. Or maybe it could be things, like you're trying to prove your worth by wealth and by having stuff, and you want people to say, oh, wow, they're worth something now. They really matter. And you're finding out it's empty too. That's an empty way to live. So what do you do with that? Well, there's 4 things you can do. Number 1, you can blame the things you put your heart to, and you can drop them and try new things that you put your heart to. And that's the fool's way, because that's fool's gold and it will never pan out. Or you can blame yourself and you can beat yourself up and you can say, well, I'm a failure because I've done all of this and everybody else is happy around me, but I'm not. But that's a mirage too, by the way, if they're doing that stuff. And so you can say, maybe, I'm just going to blame the world. That's a third thing. I'm just going to blame the world. Curse the opposite sex. Curse love. Just be that person. Then you dehumanize yourself, by the way, if you do that. Or the last thing is, you can change the entire focus of your life. And you can put your desire, your top desire, where it belongs. And that is in relationship with the living God who created you. Something supernatural, something eternal. Jacob, after this epic hookup, says, give me the one I've been lusting for. The Hebrew, it says this. This is the translation, so children, cover your ears. I want to go into her. That's all he cares about. And then here's Leah. She's saying, I'll go to whatever lengths it takes to have that man. Which is just as pornographic, believe me, it is. Because it takes God out of the picture both times. They're both wrong. Their lives become a mess or remain a mess. Ernest Becker says, no human relationship can bear the burden of godhood, however much we idolize him, our love partner. He inevitably reflects earthly imperfection and decay. And he is our ideal measure of value. If he is our ideal measure of value, this imperfection falls back on us. So we have this drive for one true love, which God put in us. In pursuit of the fantasy with the human being, we set ourselves up for disappointment if that's where it ends, probably disaster. What do we do about it? Here's the third point. God can do something about your longing, and he can fill it. And you got to see what God does in and for Leah in this whole scenario. Leah is the first person in this love triangle to get it. And she does see what you're supposed to see here. Remember, she had these 3 sons, believing that they would fulfill her with him, with Jacob. Then the 4th one, she makes this statement. She says, this one I give to God. She understood God's grace. And I think she got God through Jacob, by the way, so give him some credit. He was a God worshiper. She grasped the concept of God's love through Jacob. She's getting it. Tim Keller says that Laban and Jacob had stolen her life. But when she stopped giving her heart to humans and gave it to the Lord, she got her life back. Let me ask you this question. Is there something in your life that you're treating as the ultimate thing? And what do you need to do to break your heart away from that so you can give it to the true one? I am absolutely certain that everyone in this room probably has something like that, if you're honest. Do you know what it is? Leah began to understand what you're supposed to do with your desire to love. And she turned her heart toward the one who could truly only give her what she needed. And that was God. And then God did something marvelous for her and for us. There's something special about number 4, Judah. The writer of Genesis tells us in chapter 49 that it's through Judah that our king will come. Through Judah, his tribe. This is the Masonic line. This is the girl nobody wanted. God said, I want you, and I'm going to make you the one. Now, why did God do that? Is it just because he likes the underdog? I think he does like the underdog. But I think he did it because he's a bridegroom who loves the rejected. That's who he is. And he's saying, I'm the husband of the husbandless. I'm the father of the fatherless. He loves the unattractive. Thank goodness for me. He loves the weak. Thank goodness for me. Maybe you. God says, if no one else will love this girl, I'll love her and I'll make her great. He's not just a king and we're his subjects. He's not just a shepherd and we're the sheep. He's a husband to the hurting, to the outcast, to the unloved. And he loves you. This is a romantic story. The romance is all God piling it back on you and me because he brought Jesus through her. God chose Leah because he's a savior. He saves. The way up is down. The way to become rich is to become destitute and to give it away. The way to power is to serve others. God works this way. He chooses the foolish things to shame the wise. He chooses the weak things to shame the strong. He chooses even the things that all would reject to elevate them. Jesus. He chooses us by the rejected one, the unloved one, the son of Leah. Lord, we're communing now. We're going to come into this place where we see this story come to fruition in the life of your son Jesus, showing us the true heart of God who loves the unlovely, who forgives the broken, who repairs the brokenhearted, the one who came to set us free. And he did it through his own rejection. In a sense, he was Leah too. The world woke up and said, and there was Leah. And then we found out, oh yeah. Oh yeah. The one who loved more than others. The one who gave himself. Thank you, Jesus. So there's all kinds of applications to this story. You should really read it today and go through it yourself. First of all, some of you have a Laban in your life. You got a person in your life who all they care about is himself. And you have a person in your life who is making you bitter. Don't be bitter. Get better. Don't let them take advantage of you. Don't let them ruin your life. Seek God. God's got the answer for you. You're going to find your real worth not in your father or your mother or your siblings or your friends or your husband or wife. It's going to be in God, your Father. Second, you might be someone who knows rejection and betrayal. Maybe you're recently divorced and you didn't want to be. Maybe you got used up and set aside by somebody and you're hurting. Remember, God knows what it's like to be rejected. If he knows nothing else, and he knows everything else, he knows that. He became the son of Leah. He came to his own, and his own received him not. He gets your heart, and he'll restore it if you'll let him. Third, Don't let marriage and parenting throw you. Because one of the great morals of this story is, in the morning, there will be Leah. And that's really not a slam on Leah. It's a slam on you if you think you're going to find validity in a human being. For those of you who have kids, if you understand this, it'll make you less likely to try to live vicariously through your children, which is a big deal in our culture. Because there's always going to be something off if he, she, them become your God. Same thing true with your spouse. And one more thing. You might believe that you've messed up your life. I want to tell you this. No one messes up God's plan for your life. But, like Leah, you better put yourself in his plan. It took her a while, a long while to figure that out. But she put herself in his plan, and then things changed for her. You know, you hear this here a lot, and we're going to keep saying it because it's the right thing to say. Every one of us has a marvelous capacity to mess up our life. Every one of us has at some level. But we have a God who loves us despite of that. We have a God who comes into our world and says, whatever it is you're trying to do to fill that void in your life, I will show you I can do it for you. And once he does that, everything changes. If you're a person who's looking for that change, that's why we're here as a church. We want to help you on that road of discovery, where you go from being the Leah who says, if, then people will love me, to becoming the person that says, God loves me now. I can be what I need to be for others. Let us help you with that.